Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live presentation entitled Preparing for Match Day 2024, U.S. Immigration Visa Options for Physicians and Hospital HR Teams. I'm Friedman. I'm a partner at WR Immigration, and I'm based in our Santa Monica, California office. And I'm pleased to be joined by my partner and colleague of many years, Naveen Bhora. Both of us have many years of experience helping out international medical graduates, as well as university and medical schools with these types of issues. And so we thought it would be very timely to talk about, with Match Day just being a few days away, we've already started receiving inquiries from foreign national physicians who are about to match into programs about their U.S. visa options and how the process works. So we understand that most programs direct the FMGs, both medical residents and fellows, to apply for the J-1 visa through ECFMG. We wanted to cover some alternatives that the medical resident or fellow might be interested in as well. So Naveen, let's start off with one of the other major alternatives to the J-1, which is the H-1B. So could you talk about what is the H-1B and what are some of the pros and cons of the H-1B as opposed to proceeding with the J-1 through ECFMG?
Hi, Andy. Thanks for that intro. I just wanted to make a note that Abhi and I have actually been working together for well over 20 years. And we've actually helped hundreds of physicians go through this process. So happy to be here. You know, we often are asked about alternatives to the J-1 because some physicians feel that they don't want to go through that process since you do become subject to a 2-year home residence requirement. The H-1B certainly has certain benefits in that you can avoid that 2-year home residence requirement. And so, from the hospital side, you may be presented with a request for an H-1. And there are certain individuals who may feel that they're not eligible for a J-1 visa because of family relationships in the United States. With the J-1, you do need to show that you have strong ties to your home country and that you don't have any intention of living in the United States permanently. So for individuals who are married to U.S. citizens or permanent residents, that may be very difficult to prove and to get a J-1 visa. Another reason people would try to get an H-1 is that there's such a much more easier transition to a green card if you don't have to go through that 2-year home residence requirement. But of course, there are drawbacks as well to the H-1. The one that most companies and employers are concerned about are the fees. The H-1s are very expensive. The filing fees are actually going up on April 1. And even if the individual asks for support for the H-1B, where they would cover the filing fees and the costs, that's actually not permitted. So you can't have the individual H-1B worker or physician pay for the cost of an H-1. The H-1 is also limited to 6 years. So if you have somebody who's already been on H-1B status doing research, then they may not have that much time left. And the other benefit to a J-1 actually that the H-1 may not have is that the spouse is able to work on the J-2, and there are very few individual spouses on H-4 who are eligible for that work authorization. So while there are certain benefits to an H-1B, that the J-1 may still be the most suitable visa option.
And how about in the H-1B context, that extra step of dealing with Department of Labor? Can you talk a little bit about the interaction with the both USCIS and Department of Labor with the H-1B process?
Yeah, sure. So the J-1 is supported through ECFMG. The application happens with ECFMG. They issue a DS 2019 form, and then the physician's able to apply for their visa. With the H-1B, the company or the employer, the hospital, has to file an H-1B petition with immigration first. And before they're able to do that, they do need to do a labor condition application with the Department of Labor and show that that the individual is going to be paid above what's considered the prevailing wage. So there may be some challenges there in demonstrating that the individual be paid above prevailing wage. There is notice that needs to be posted, and it is work site specific as well. So going through that process of getting the H-1 at minimum can take 3 weeks to get that certified labor condition application. And then with the request for premium processing, the petition can be adjudicated within 2 weeks. I do want to note that in addition to the fees going up, premium processing is also going to slow down to 15 working days and not 15 calendar days.
And so the H-1B lottery is upon us. And, for those that are subject to the cap, do H-1B residents have to worry about the H-1B cap and the lottery and the registration and filings in April and, only starting in October? How does that work for medical residents?
Sure. That's a great question. So medical centers or hospitals that have a GME program are typically affiliated with a university or medical school, and they are what's considered cap exempt. So they can apply for an H-1B year-round without having to worry about that annual quota and having someone go through that cap. For those individuals who are doing the H-1B residency or GME on H-1, because they have been able to obtain their H-1B visa outside of that annual cap, once they complete their program and they're now trying to get an attending position on the H-1B, they remain cap subject. So for them to transition then to a clinical position as an attending, they would have to go through that annual H-1B lottery and secure that registration and then have the H-1B start in October. And so there may be a gap in employment authorization from the time their program, their GME completes in, let's say, June to when their H-1B would kick in October. And then there's also the uncertainty of actually being selected in the cap.
Okay. So let's move on to a couple other options. And we could talk about employment authorization documents or EADs. We're seeing a lot more physicians being eligible for or have valid EADs that would like to pursue residency or fellowship. So can you tell us, how do you qualify for an EAD? What are some of the basis for getting an EAD? And normally these EADs are issued for limited periods. So what about the possibility of having an interruption in work authorization during a residency or fellowship program?
Yeah, so the EAD, or an employment authorization document, is offered for various categories and reasons. And we're actually seeing a lot more people trying to obtain that EAD and do their residency on the EAD as a way to avoid the J-1. And they also know that H-1Bs are limited when it comes to GME. You can get EADs for various reasons. One of the common ones, for example, is if somebody's spouse is here on an H-1, they are no longer, they don't have a green card number available to them. So they're able to get what's called an H-4 EAD. So as a spouse of an H-1, they have the EAD. If you're on an L2 as a spouse of an L1, you can also be work authorized. Some people obtain EADs as part of a green card process where they may have had a lot of publications and they've applied for a national interest waiver based on their credentials. And then through that green card application, they've received an employment authorization card. The employment authorization card is one of the acceptable documents to show work authorization for the Form I-9. So they are certainly work authorized. The concern sometimes is because they are limited in duration, are they able to renew the EAD, and are they able to continue working while the renewal is in process? And again, it depends on the category and whether or not they have the benefit of an automatic extension of their EAD while the extension application is pending. Some categories do, some don't. So if you are presented with a candidate or an individual who has an EAD, certainly reach out to your immigration provider, and so they can explain, what that subcategory is and what the specific rules are for that particular category.
So one other category we could talk about is the O1, which is for aliens of extraordinary ability. Probably a little bit more rare for a starting medical resident, but I guess a possibility, maybe more common in the fellowship scenario. Again, maybe a limited. Can you just briefly talk to us about, some of the criteria for the O1, and then we'll go on to our next topics.
Yeah, the O1 is actually a great visa for people who are who've done a lot of research as leading up to residency or even during residency. It is for people who can demonstrate that they are at the very top of their field. They've had publications. Their work has gone through the test of time and have had the citations. They're well known in their field. So if you do have a stellar candidate like that, the O1 may be an option for them. We also see this where someone's maybe used up their H-1B time on residency and now it's time for fellowship, and the O1 might be the option that they go for. The O1 is also there for someone who has gone through J1, is subject to that 2-year home residence requirement. While they may not be eligible for an H-1B visa or a green card, they can obtain an O1. So the O1 is actually a really great visa option for physicians, especially those who've done a lot of research.
So for those that are already in the United States, for instance, they're on dependent status, maybe they're a J1 or H-1B researcher, or they're here observing in B status. How does the change of status process work with the Immigration Service?
There are a lot of people who are here and they are hesitant to go back home to get their visas done for various reasons. So depending on their current status, how long they've been admitted for, and in that status, they may be eligible for a change of status. But most people find it to be a lot faster to just go back to their home country to get the visa. And so with that, let's pivot and talk about the consular process. Avi, what does the consular process look like for J1s or people who are already here and are thinking about traveling back home to visit family for a renewal?
So the majority of the J1s or H1s will probably be applying from abroad at a U.S. consular post, a U.S. embassy, or a U.S. consulate. And one of the key things is just planning, because especially coming out of the pandemic, we're still seeing backlogs at many of the major and busy U.S. consular posts. So timing and preparing in advance is very critical because of the backlogs in getting non-immigrant visa appointments, especially with the J1, which is subject to 214B, or the presumption of non-immigrant intent. There's always going to be a risk of denial because it is at the consular officer's discretion and how they view the visa applicant in terms of weighing their ties back to their home country. So the applicant themselves have to overcome and show very strong ties and be able to prove that when they complete their residency, they're going to go back to their home country. Also, for some countries, particularly those from Middle Eastern countries or Pakistan, there's always a risk of administrative processing or security clearance delays. And if somebody does get caught up in administrative processing from the university medical school perspective, there is the option to put in an expedite request. And sometimes we even see where the resident and their spouse apply at different times. The resident might get their visa, show up to the United States, start their position. Their spouse applies, particularly in the J2 context, they apply for the J2, and sometimes they do end up with denial. So those are some major issues. So, that's a summary about the consular processing side of things. I did want to say, if you do have additional questions or would like to follow up on any of these topics, to feel free to message either myself or Naveen. We did want to thank you for joining today's LinkedIn Live presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.